My name is Sienna, I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life being the difficult one in my family. That's what happens when you're the only person who questions why every family crisis becomes an opportunity for my parents to reassert control over my life. My father, Robert 62, retired accountant and master of using his health scares as leverage, had just come out of what his doctor called routine gallbladder surgery. My mother Linda, ever the orchestrator, had summoned the entire family to St. Mary's Hospital like we were gathering for a board meeting, not a recovery visit. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, that particular hospital scent that makes everything feel more serious than it is. My older brother Marcus arrived first with his wife Jennifer, both looking appropriately concerned. My younger sister Olivia showed up 20 minutes later, mascara already smudged from crying in the car. And then there was me, who'd driven 3 hours from the city because Linda's text said emergency surgery when it was actually scheduled weeks ago. That's how toxic family dynamics work: manufactured urgency to ensure compliance and attendance. Linda had positioned herself in the corner of the waiting room like a general surveying her troops, her face perfectly composed in that expression of brave suffering she'd perfected over the years. "Thank you all for coming during this difficult time," she said, as if Dad was in critical condition instead of sleeping off anesthesia in recovery. Marcus nodded solemnly, Jennifer squeezed his hand, and Olivia dabbed at her eyes. I sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chair and wondered how long before this became about me instead of about Dad's gallbladder. Dr. Patterson came out within minutes, still in his scrubs, smiling in that reassuring way doctors do when everything went perfectly. Mr. Morrison came through beautifully. Textbook procedure. He'll be groggy for a few hours, but he can go home tomorrow morning. Relief washed over everyone's faces, genuine relief, because despite everything, we did love him. But I saw something else flicker across Linda's expression: calculation. She'd been building up to something, using Robert's surgery as the stage, and now she had her captive audience with nowhere to escape. "Before we go see your father," Linda began, and my stomach dropped because nothing good ever started with those words, "I need to discuss something important with all of you present." There it was, the emotional trigger dressed up as family concern during a medical crisis. This was family control in critical moments, using the hospital setting to add weight and urgency to whatever ultimatum she'd prepared. Marcus looked confused, Jennifer uncomfortable, and Olivia automatically reached for her mother's hand in solidarity. I stayed very still, already feeling the familiar dread of being ambushed. "Your father and I have been talking before the surgery, of course, about Sienna's situation." My situation. Not my career change, not my decision, not my life. My situation, like I was a problem requiring intervention. The emotional abuse in families always sounds so reasonable when delivered in hushed hospital tones, surrounded by the sick and dying, as if the setting itself validates the control. "We're very concerned," Linda continued, glancing at the others for support, "about the reckless choice she's making to leave her stable position during such an uncertain time." I watched Marcus shift in his seat, clearly uncomfortable that this was happening here, now, but not uncomfortable enough to say anything. Jennifer stared at her hands. Olivia looked between our mother and me like she was watching a tennis match. And I realized this was the family humiliation playbook, hospital edition. Use Dad's surgery to gather witnesses, use the emotional vulnerability of a medical setting to make objections seem heartless, use the collective anxiety to steamroll over my boundaries. They'd done this before with Marcus' divorce, with Olivia's college choices. This was their pattern. "We think," Linda said, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that demanded everyone leaning closer, "that it would be incredibly selfish for you to add stress to your father's recovery by pursuing this whim." There it was, the word designed to minimize months of planning into childish impulse. The emotional manipulation at the hospital was in full effect: question her judgment, attack her timing, make it about Dad's health instead of their control. I looked around at my family sitting in that waiting room, all of them watching me, waiting for my response. And for the first time in my life, I didn't immediately start defending myself. I just pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. "We're only bringing this up now because we love you, sweetheart," my mother added, her hand reaching across to touch my knee in what would look like comfort to anyone passing by. That's the thing about emotional abuse in families during medical crisis, it always comes wrapped in concern for someone's health, making any pushback seem monstrous. Robert was sleeping peacefully 2 floors up, completely unaware his gallbladder surgery was being weaponized against his daughter. This wasn't love, this was family control dressed up in hospital scrubs and worry. Linda leaned forward, lowering her voice even more as a nurse walked past. Your father was so stressed before the surgery, worried about you throwing away your career. The doctor even asked if something was bothering him because his blood pressure was elevated. I felt the familiar twist of guilt in my stomach. See what you did, Sienna? You're literally making your father sick with your choices. Marcus winced, and I knew he'd fallen for it. This was controlling parents 101. Make your autonomy responsible for someone else's health crisis. We didn't want to say anything before the procedure, my mother continued, glancing at Olivia who nodded supportively, but now that he's through it safely, we need to address this. For his recovery. The implication was crystal clear. My career change wasn't just reckless, it was medically dangerous to my father. Jennifer looked genuinely distressed, probably wondering if she should have pushed Marcus to talk to me earlier. The toxic family dynamics were working perfectly. Use the hospital setting to amplify guilt, make everyone complicit in the intervention. The stress of wondering what you're going to do with your life, Linda said, her voice taking on that trembling quality she used when really selling the performance. It's not good for his heart. You know he has hypertension. Except his hypertension was well controlled with medication and had nothing to do with my job. But facts didn't matter when you were painting someone as selfish enough to endanger their recovering father. Marcus finally spoke up. Maybe we should focus on Dad getting better first? But his voice was weak, already beaten down by years of these exact scenarios. My mother's eyes flashed with irritation at Marcus' interruption, but she quickly smoothed it over. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, sweetheart. Your sister's impulsive decision is affecting your father's health. We're trying to protect him. There it was, family humiliation disguised as protecting the patient. Make me the villain in Dad's medical story, turn my life choices into a threat to his well-being. Olivia squeezed Linda's hand, fully invested in the narrative. The hospital PA system crackled overhead, calling for a Dr. Wilson, and I thought how appropriate to needed a doctor for the sick family dynamic. Think about what this stress could do during his recovery period, Linda pressed on, really driving the point home. The next 6 weeks are critical. He needs peace, not worry about his daughter making reckless life choices. The emotional manipulation at the hospital was reaching its peak. Use the recovery timeline as a deadline for my compliance, make his healing contingent on my surrender. Jennifer looked at me with what might have been pity or might have been judgment. Either way, the message was clear: good daughters don't stress out their post-surgical fathers. We're not asking you to give up your dreams, my mother said, and I almost laughed at the audacity. We're asking you to be reasonable. Wait until your father is fully recovered. Wait until things are stable. Is that so much to ask? Yes, actually, because wait until was code for wait forever. Wait until Dad recovers, wait until the economy improves, wait until you're older, wiser, more settled. Controlling parents never run out of reasons why now isn't the right time for your independence. The family control in critical moments had a new timeline: Dad's recovery, which could be extended indefinitely depending on how cooperative I was. Don't embarrass us by being selfish during a medical crisis, Linda said quietly, so quietly that it sounded almost kind. But I heard it for what it was. The real concern wasn't Dad's blood pressure or recovery, it was how it would look if I pursued my own path while he was vulnerable. What would the relatives say? The neighbors? Their church friends? The family drama wasn't about my welfare or even Dad's health, it was about maintaining the appearance of a unified family where everyone stayed in their assigned roles, even in hospital waiting rooms. And sitting there, surrounded by witnesses who said nothing, I realized something: I could keep playing this part, or I could start recording every word. Actually, Sienna's always been impulsive, Linda said to Jennifer, as if I wasn't sitting right there in the waiting room. She was rewriting my entire personality in front of witnesses, turning my carefully considered career change into evidence of lifelong instability. Marcus shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, and that silence, that complicit, cowardly silence in a hospital corridor, was its own form of violence. This was family humiliation in its purest form, watching someone reshape your truth while witnesses pretended to study the inspirational posters on the walls. My mother continued, her voice carrying that tone of patient suffering. Remember when she wanted to move to Portland after college? We had to talk sense into her then too. Except ID never wanted to move to Portland. That was a weekend trip ID mentioned once, twisted into evidence of my supposed recklessness. But facts didn't matter in toxic family dynamics. What mattered was the narrative she needed to justify control. She gets these ideas in her head, Linda said to Olivia, who nodded knowingly, and doesn't think about the consequences. That's why she needs us. A volunteer pushing a flower cart walked by, and Linda paused, offering her a warm smile before turning back to our family intervention. The worst part is, she doesn't even realize how her choices affect others. Your father lying in that recovery room, worrying about her future when he should be focused on healing. The emotional abuse in families isn't always screaming in ICU hallways. Sometimes it's this, being discussed like a case study while your father sleeps off anesthesia upstairs. Jennifer looked genuinely concerned now, probably wondering if I really was some chaos agent disguised as a responsible adult. She's always been our dreamer, my mother said, reaching over to pat my hand in what would look like affection to anyone passing by. Brilliant, of course, but not very practical. That's why Robert and I have to step in during critical moments like this. The family control in critical moments was being rebramed as loving intervention, my autonomy recast as naivety requiring parental correction. A doctor walked past talking on his phone about discharge orders, and I thought how ironic, people getting released from this hospital while I was being held hostage in the waiting room. Marcus finally attempted to redirect. Mom, maybe we should just focus on seeing Dad when he wakes up? But Linda waved him off like he was a mosquito interrupting important work. This I ask about your father, Marcus. His health depends on family stability right now. She turned to me, her eyes wide with manufactured concern. Sienna, you understand that, don't you? You're not so selfish that you'd prioritize a career whim over your father's recovery? The controlling parents were doing what they did best, framing my choices as fundamentally selfish, making my independence synonymous with hurting the people I loved. We're not asking for much, Linda continued, her voice taking on that wounded quality she used when guilt wasn't working fast enough. Just that you postpone this reckless decision until your father is strong enough to handle the stress. Is that really so unreasonable? She looked around at Marcus, Jennifer, and Olivia, inviting them to agree with her assessment of my unreasonableness. Jennifer nodded slightly, and I watched my mother's satisfied smile. The public humiliation was working. I was being painted as the problem child who couldn't put family first even during a medical crisis. Olivia leaned forward, her voice soft with concern. Sienna, maybe Mom's right. Maybe it's not the best timing? And there it was, even my younger sister, recruited into the performance, validating the narrative that my life decisions should be dictated by Dad's surgical schedule. The silence from everyone else reinforced the family drama. Marcus staring at his shoes, Jennifer studying the vending machine menu, everyone choosing comfort over truth. A patient in a wheelchair rolled past with her daughter, both laughing about something, and I felt the sharp contrast: other families supporting each other, mine systematically dismantling me. I just want you to really think about what you're doing, my mother said, loud enough that a woman sitting across from us looked up from her magazine. Linda wanted witnesses beyond our family, wanted strangers to see the concerned mother trying to reason with her difficult daughter. Think about your father upstairs, think about this family, think about how selfish it would be to cause him stress when he needs peace. The emotional manipulation at the hospital reached its crescendo. Reality rewritten, my character assassinated, all in the soft, concerned tones appropriate for a medical facility. And everyone watching did absolutely nothing to stop it. I took a slow breath and let the silence settle around me like the recycled hospital air. They were waiting for me to react, to defend myself, to promise I'd reconsider any response that would confirm their narrative of me as the impulsive, selfish daughter who needed managing. Instead, I reached for my purse, pulled out a bottle of water, and took a deliberate sip while maintaining eye contact with my mother. My phone sat in my lap, voice recorder running, capturing every word of this hospital family drama for posterity. Nobody noticed, they never did when they were too busy performing. Linda shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with my lack of emotional response. Controlling parents hate silence because it disrupts their script, leaves them searching for the next manipulation when you refuse to deliver your lines. I watched her eyes dart to Marcus, then to Olivia, looking for someone to fill the awkward gap I'd created. The hospital intercom announced visiting hours for the cardiac unit, and I used the interruption to mentally catalog everything she'd said. The Portland lie, the claim about Dad's elevated blood pressure, the implication that my career change was medically dangerous. All of it, recorded. I started noticing things I'd always overlooked before. The way my mother's voice changed when she lied, it got softer, more breathy, like she was sharing a painful truth instead of manufacturing one. The way Marcus' leg bounced when he wanted to speak but didn't dare, that nervous energy trapped in his body because speaking up against Linda had never been safe. Jennifer's tight grip on her purse strap, knuckles white, probably recognizing the toxic family dynamics but feeling powerless as an outsider. These were the physical tells of emotional abuse in families, the signs I'd been too hurt to notice before. My mother tried again, her voice taking on that saccharine quality she used when manipulation needed a softer touch. "Sienna, sweetheart, you're being awfully quiet. You're not angry with us for caring about you, are you?" She was fishing, trying to provoke a reaction, anything to get me back into the familiar dance of defend and apologize. I looked at her steadily and said, "I'm just listening, Mom. Processing everything you're saying about Dad's health." The slight widening of her eyes told me she hadn't expected that calm response. Family control in critical moments requires your panic. It falls apart when you become the observer instead of the victim. I mentally documented everything while an elderly man shuffled past with his 4-pole. Robert's supposed pre-surgery stress about my career, useful information, easily disproven by his actual medical records. Linda's claim that the doctor asked about stress are suspiciously vague, probably fabricated. The timeline she was proposing: wait until Dad's fully recovered, which in their language meant wait indefinitely. Every instance of family humiliation, every controlling statement disguised as medical concern, I filed away like evidence in a case I didn't know I was building yet. My phone continued recording, a silent witness that couldn't be guilted into compliance. Olivia broke first, her voice uncertain. "Are you okay, Sienna? You seem different." Translation: you're not playing your role, and it's making everyone uncomfortable. I looked at my younger sister, who'd spent her whole life being the good daughter by comparison to my supposed difficulty, and felt something like pity. "I'm fine, Liv. Just really thinking about what Mom said about Dad's recovery being affected by my choices. It's a serious claim." Linda's expression flickered satisfaction that I seemed to be taking it seriously, mixed with wariness at my tone. Marcus finally found his voice. "Maybe we should just focus on seeing Dad when he wakes up and table this discussion?" But Linda cut him off immediately. "This I ask about your father, Marcus. His recovery depends on family harmony, which means Sienna needs to make responsible choices." She turned back to me, clearly frustrated by my continued calm. "Don't you have anything to say? Any assurance you can give your father when he wakes up?" I smiled, not big, just a small curve of my lips, and said, "I think it would be better if we had this conversation when Dad can actually participate. Since it's supposedly about his health." The waiting room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. A nurse walked by pushing a medication cart, and I used the moment to glance at my phone screen. 37 minutes of recording so far. Jennifer was watching me with something that looked like cautious respect, maybe recognizing what I was doing even if no one else did. And sitting there, silently observing while they performed my character assassination in a hospital waiting room, I realized something fundamental about family revenge stories: they don't start with a plan for payback. They start with a decision to stop participating in your own erasure, to become a witness to the truth instead of a victim of their narrative. And I'd already started winning. While my mother launched into another monologue about family responsibility during medical crises, I made a decision that would change everything. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden epiphany, no movie moment where background music swelled. It was quiet, deliberate, almost clinical in its simplicity. Under the guise of checking messages, I opened my email app and started a new draft, fingers moving steadily while maintaining concerned eye contact with Linda. The subject line read Hospital Conversation, Dad's Surgery, January 21st documentation. Nobody noticed they were too invested in their performance. I typed quickly, documenting timestamps and direct quotes while they were still sharp in my mind. 2:47 p.m. Mother claims dad's pre-surgery blood pressure elevated due to my career plans. States doctor questioned him about stressors. No medical records to support this claim. This was emotional revenge in its quietest form, not fighting back, but creating a record that couldn't be gaslit away later when they inevitably claimed this conversation never happened. The thing about toxic family dynamics is they rely on your faulty memory, your confusion about what was actually said versus what you felt. But I was building proof, one sentence at a time. Marcus started talking about needing to move his car before the parking meter expired, clearly desperate to escape the tension. I let him fumble through his excuse, using the distraction to switch apps again. I pulled up my contacts and scrolled to Dr. Patterson's office number. It was on the discharge paperwork they'd given Linda. I didn't call, not yet, but I saved it with a note verified Dad's actual pre-surgery consultation. Medical records request if necessary. Family control only works when you accept their version of reality. The moment you start fact-checking, the foundation cracks. Robert's recovery room number flashed on the waiting room screen. Who was awake and ready for visitors. Linda stood immediately, smoothing her blouse like she was preparing for a performance. "Before we go up," she said, her voice firm, "I need Sienna to acknowledge what we've discussed. Your father needs to hear that you're reconsidering this reckless decision." There it was, the need for my verbal compliance, my public agreement that would be used as evidence of my promise later. Controlling parents can't just control, they need you to participate in your own subjugation, preferably with witnesses. I stood slowly, slipping my phone into my jacket pocket, recording still running. "Actually, Mom, I think we should have this conversation with Dad present. Since according to you, his health is so deeply affected by my choices, he should be part of the discussion, don't you think?" Her eyes narrowed. That wasn't the response she wanted. She'd expected me to either comply or cause a scene, not suggest including the person this was supposedly about. Jennifer made a small noise that might have been surprise or approval. The family humiliation only worked if I accepted it privately and moved on. I was suggesting we make it official. "That's not necessary," Linda said quickly, too quickly. "Your father needs rest, not stress. Just give me your word that you'll postpone your plans until he's recovered." But I shook my head slowly, keeping my voice gentle and reasonable. If my career change is affecting his medical condition, his doctor should know about it. Maybe I should speak with Dr. Patterson about what stressors to avoid during Dad's recovery. The color drained slightly from my mother's face. She'd painted herself into a corner, either admit she'd exaggerated his medical concerns, or let me verify her claims with his actual physician. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the silence of my compliance, this was the silence of them realizing I'd stopped playing the game by their rules. Family control in critical moments depends on using the crisis to bypass normal boundaries, making you feel guilty for asking reasonable questions when someone's health is supposedly at stake. But ID just called her bluff. If Dad's recovery was truly at risk, medical professionals should be involved. If it wasn't, she'd been using his surgery as leverage for emotional manipulation at the hospital. "You're being ridiculous," my mother hissed, her mask slipping for just a second before she caught herself. Olivia looked confused, Marcus looked relieved, and Jennifer looked like she was watching a masterclass in standing up to controlling parents. I pulled out my phone openly this time, no more hiding it. "I'm going to send a quick email to Dr. Patterson's office asking about post-surgical stress management. Just want to make sure I'm doing everything right for Dad's recovery." My finger hovered over the send button on the draft. ID actually prepared a polite inquiry about visiting Robert's medical team to discuss family support during recovery. Linda's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, anger, calculation, forced calm. That won't be necessary, she said through gritted teeth. Let's just go see your father. She turned toward the elevators, her whole body rigid with barely contained fury. But ID just done something she never expected. ID treated her emotional manipulation like a legitimate medical concern that required professional verification. The decision no one saw wasn't just about recording or documenting, it was about stepping outside the family drama and treating this like what it actually was, a control tactic disguised as health advocacy. And by offering to involve his actual medical team, ID exposed the lie without ever calling her a liar. As we walked toward the elevator, I hit send on that email. The power had already shifted, they just didn't know it yet. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and the antiseptic smell hit stronger here, mixing with that peculiar hospital dinner scent wafting from patient rooms. Linda led our procession down the hallway like a general, her heels clicking against the linoleum in a rhythm that screamed control. But as we approached room 428, I stopped walking. Actually, before we go in, I need Dad to hear directly from you what you told me downstairs. My mother turned, her face a mask of confusion and irritation. This wasn't part of the script. We were supposed to present a unified front to recovering Robert. What are you talking about? Linda asked, her voice tight and low so the nurses at their station wouldn't hear. I pulled out my phone, opening my notes app where ID documented everything. You said Dad's pre-surgery blood pressure was elevated because of stress about my career change. You said his doctor asked about stressors. I want him to confirm that, since it's such a serious medical concern. Marcus' eyes widened. Jennifer actually smiled for a split second before catching herself. The power reversal was happening right there in the hospital corridor, and I could feel the shift like air pressure changing before a storm. My mother's face went through a fascinating journey: shock, rage, calculation, then forced maternal concern. Sienna, your father just had surgery. This is hardly the time to interrogate him about conversations he may or may not remember clearly. But I held my ground, phone in hand, voice steady and clear. If his health is being affected by my choices, we need to address it properly. Either it's a legitimate medical concern that requires his care team's attention, or it's not. Which is it, Mom? The question hung in the sterile air like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. A nurse walked past with a medication tray, and Linda waited until she was out of earshot. Put that phone away, she hissed. This is a hospital, not a courtroom. And there it was, the moment where the concerned parent became the authority figure demanding compliance. But I didn't put the phone away. Instead, I said calmly, I'm just documenting medical information about Dad's condition so I can support his recovery properly. Unless there's a reason you don't want your exact words recorded? The family control in critical moments was crumbling because ID stopped treating her manipulation as motherly concern and started treating it as information that should withstand scrutiny. Olivia tried to intervene, her voice pleading. Can we please just see Dad? He's probably wondering where we are. But I shook my head gently. In a minute, Liv. First, I need Mom to clarify something. You said downstairs that Dad was so stressed about my career change that it affected his pre-surgical blood pressure. I've been thinking about that, and I realized that would be in his medical chart, right? The doctor would have documented significant stress factors. Linda's eyes darted to the nurse's station, probably calculating whether to make a scene or retreat. Marcus found his courage somewhere between the elevator and this moment. Mom, did Dad actually say he was stressed about Sienna's job? Or is that something you assumed? His voice was quiet but firm, and I watched Linda's face register the betrayal. Her own son, questioning her narrative, in a hospital hallway where she'd expected complete control. The toxic family dynamics that had worked for decades were failing because someone had finally asked for evidence instead of accepting emotional manipulation at face value. I can't believe you're all turning on me while your father lies recovering, Linda said, her voice taking on that wounded quality that had always worked before. But Jennifer spoke up, surprising everyone. No one's turning on you, Linda. Sienna just asked a reasonable question about Robert's medical condition. The silent power reversal was complete. Even the daughter-in-law, who usually stayed quiet, was calling out the manipulation. I watched my mother's carefully constructed authority crumble as she realized her audience wasn't buying the performance anymore. Robert's voice drifted from the room behind us, groggy and confused. "Linda? Is everyone out there?" My mother grabbed the door handle like a lifeline, desperate to escape the confrontation and reset in front of her recovering husband. But I stepped forward, my hand on the door too, and said 5 words that changed everything. "Let's ask Dad together, then." Her face went white because she knew we both knew that Robert had no idea his surgery had been weaponized against me, that his blood pressure had been fabricated as evidence, that his recovery was being used as emotional leverage. The family humiliation shed orchestrated downstairs was about to be exposed by the one person who was supposed to validate it. And there was nothing she could do to stop it without admitting Shed lied. The controlling parent's playbook doesn't include a chapter on what happens when someone demands accountability in real time, with witnesses, with the supposed victim right there to contradict the narrative. I pushed open the door, and Linda had no choice but to follow. Robert looked small in the hospital bed, pale but alert, for dripping steadily into his arm. "There's my family," he said with a weak smile, clearly still groggy from anesthesia. Linda rushed to his side immediately, kissing his forehead, reclaiming her position as devoted wife before anyone could speak. But I was right behind her, and before she could redirect the conversation, I said, "Dad, how are you feeling? Mom mentioned you were really stressed before surgery." His eyebrows furrowed in confusion, and I watched Linda's hand tighten on the bed rail. "Stressed?" "Not particularly," Robert said, his words slightly slurred from the medication. "Just the normal anxiety about going under, I guess." "Why?" The room went completely silent. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, Jennifer's hand covering her mouth. Olivia looked between our mother and father like she was watching her entire understanding of reality shift. Linda's face was a mask of forced calm, but I could see the panic in her eyes. The family control shed built on his supposed medical crisis was collapsing with every word from his own mouth. "Linda told us downstairs that your blood pressure was elevated before surgery because you were worried about Sienna's career change," Marcus said quietly, finding his voice in his father's honesty. Robert blinked slowly, trying to process through the anesthesia fog. "My blood pressure? It was actually lower than usual. Dr. Patterson commented on its aid. Whatever I was doing to manage stress was working." He looked at Linda with genuine confusion. "Why would you tell them that?" The emotional abuse in families was being exposed in real time, and there was nowhere for her to hide. Linda tried to recover, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "You mentioned being worried about the kids, Robert. I must have misunderstood." But my father shook his head, wincing slightly from the movement. "I said I was proud of the kids. Proud of Sienna for making a brave choice, actually. I was going to tell her after I recovered." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Olivia actually gasped. Jennifer's eyes went wide. And I felt something crack open in my chest, not heartbreak, but relief. My father, groggy and vulnerable, had just validated everything I'd suspected about my mother's manipulation. "You're confused from the medication," Linda said quickly, too quickly, her voice sharp despite her attempt at gentle concern. "You told me you were worried sick about Sienna throwing away her career. Don't you remember?" But Robert's eyes were clearing, the fog of anesthesia lifting enough for him to recognize what was happening. "Linda, what's going on? Why are you saying these things?" The toxic family dynamics were unraveling because the person Shed weaponized was conscious enough to contradict her narrative. The family humiliation Shed orchestrated downstairs was being reversed, and everyone was witnessing it. I pulled out my phone, the recording still saved, and Linda's eyes locked onto it like it was a grenade. "Dad, I'm glad you're okay. And I'm glad to hear you're actually supportive. Mom told me downstairs, in front of everyone, that your health depended on me postponing my career change. That the stress of my decision was medically dangerous to your recovery." Robert's face transformed from confusion to anger, not at me, but at Linda. She said what? His heart monitor beeped slightly faster, and a nurse poked her head in, checking the commotion. Everything okay in here? The nurse asked, her eyes scanning the monitors. Robert waved her off weakly. Fine, just family drama. Nothing new. But his voice was cold when he looked at Linda. Well, talk about this later. The fallout was immediate and devastating. My mother's face crumpled, not with genuine emotion but with the realization that her control had just evaporated in front of the entire family. Marcus was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Jennifer had tears in her eyes, probably thinking about all the times she'd witnessed similar manipulation, and said nothing. Olivia broke the silence, her voice small and hurt. Mom, why would you say those things if they weren't true? It was the golden child's first moment of questioning, the beginning of her own awakening to the family control in critical moments she'd been unknowingly supporting her entire life. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, then tried one last manipulation. I was trying to protect this family. Sometimes mothers have to make hard choices, but Robert cut her off, his voice weak but firm. Don't. Just don't, Linda. The hospital room felt like the aftermath of an earthquake, everything familiar now shifted and unstable. I looked at my mother and felt nothing, not anger, not vindication, just a profound sense of freedom. The emotional manipulation at the hospital had backfired spectacularly. She'd used my father's surgery as leverage without considering he might actually contradict her version of events. The family revenge stories write themselves when you stop participating in the lies and start demanding truth. I didn't need to say anything else. Robert had done it for me. And as I watched Linda's carefully constructed image shatter in that recovery room, I realized the silent power reversal was complete. All I had to do was ask the right questions and let the truth speak for itself. 3 months later, I started my new position at the nonprofit, doing exactly the work my mother had called reckless while my father was recovering from gallbladder surgery. The salary was lower, the hours were longer, and I'd never been happier. I sent Dad a photo of my new office with a card that said, "Thanks for being proud of me." He called immediately, his voice stronger now, fully recovered. "Your mother and I are working through some things," he said carefully. But I meant what I said in that hospital room. "I'm proud of you, Sienna." The real lesson hit me during a training session at work when my supervisor asked for honest feedback about a policy proposal. I spoke up immediately, clearly, without the familiar anxiety that my opinion would cause catastrophic family drama. A coworker thanked me afterward for voicing what others were thinking. That's when I realized the silence I'd practiced in that hospital waiting room wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about learning to observe emotional manipulation at the hospital without being destroyed by it, understanding that family control only works when you internalize it as truth about yourself. I met Jennifer for coffee in April, and she looked different, lighter, somehow. Marcus and I have been talking about what happened at the hospital. We've started setting boundaries with Linda. She stirred her latte nervously. It's been hard, but watching you stand up to her, asking for the truth in front of everyone. It showed us it was possible. She told me about family dinners they'd started declining, phone calls they'd let go to voicemail, the toxic family dynamics they were finally naming out loud. "Your mom called me manipulative last week," she said with a laugh that sounded like liberation. I told her I'd think about that and we could discuss it later when she was calm. My father and I had lunch once a month now, just the two of us, without Linda orchestrating the conversation. Over soup one afternoon, he admitted something that changed everything. "I knew your mother controlled things, but I didn't realize how much until that day in the hospital. Hearing her use my surgery, my health, as a weapon against you." His voice cracked slightly. "I was ashamed. I'm still ashamed that I didn't see it sooner, didn't protect you kids from it." The emotional abuse in families doesn't always require both parents' active participation. Sometimes one parent's passivity enables the other's control. Olivia called me in June, 7 months after the hospital incident. She'd had her own confrontation with Linda about her relationship, and for the first time, our mother had threatened to withdraw support over Olivia's choices. "I remembered what you did," she said, her voice shaking but determined. I asked her to put it in writing. Sienna, she couldn't do it. She backed down immediately and then got angry that I'd even ask. There was wonder in her voice, the sound of someone discovering that the monster under the bed disappears when you turn on the lights. Why does that work? She asked. Because controlling parents need your fear more than you need their approval, I told her. I never got the apology I might wanted years ago. My mother never acknowledged weaponizing Dad's surgery, never admitted to fabricating medical concerns to manipulate me in front of my siblings. But I stopped waiting for her confession. That's the thing about family humiliation, it only works if you need the abuser to admit what they did. The moment you stop requiring their validation and start trusting your own experience, you're free. Everyone in that hospital room heard what happened. My phone recorded it. Robert contradicted her story while barely conscious from anesthesia. That was enough. A year after that hospital visit, I received a text from my mother. Just 6 words: your father says you're doing well. Not an apology, not an admission, just a tiny crack in the wall of family control she'd built around herself. I responded with 7 I am. Hope you both are too. No warmth, no coldness, just facts. Dad and I had dinner every few weeks now, sometimes with Marcus and Jennifer, sometimes just us. Olivia joined occasionally, still navigating her own journey with boundaries. We never discussed that day at the hospital, but it hung in the air between us like a shared understanding. The final lesson of family drama and family control in critical moments isn't that you win or they lose. It's that control fails when witnesses see the truth, even if that witness is your groggy post-surgical father who accidentally exposed the lies. It's that emotional revenge doesn't require cruelty. Sometimes it's just refusing to accept someone's weaponization of a medical crisis, declining to let hospital settings excuse manipulation, insisting on facts when they're offering fear. That hospital waiting room taught me that silence can be the most powerful response you make when you're using it to observe, document, and prepare rather than to shrink. And here's what I learned about family revenge stories: they're not really about revenge at all. They're about the moment you stop participating in your own diminishment and start trusting yourself more than you fear their reaction. That day in the hospital, I didn't plan to expose my mother's manipulation. I just asked reasonable questions, suggested involving medical professionals if the concern was legitimate, and let the truth reveal itself. When you stop fighting emotional abuse in families with emotion and start responding with calm requests for clarity, the whole toxic family dynamic collapses under its own weight. My mother wielded my father's surgery like a weapon. But she forgot that weapons can backfire when the person they're aimed at refuses to flinch. And sometimes, the greatest power reversal comes not from fighting back, but from simply asking someone to repeat their lies to the one person who knows they're not true. So here's what I want you to ask yourself tonight, lying in bed when the house is quiet and you're alone with your thoughts: how many hospital waiting rooms have you sat in? How many family dinners have you endured? How many critical moments has someone in your family used as leverage to control your choices, weaponize someone's health or crisis to make you feel guilty for wanting autonomy? And more importantly, how many times have you accepted their version of reality because challenging it felt more dangerous than living with the lie? I'm not going to tell you that standing up to toxic family dynamics is easy, because it's not. I'm not going to promise that asking for accountability won't cause family drama, because it absolutely will. The fallout from that hospital confrontation rippled through my family for months, shifted relationships, forced people to choose sides or at least choose honesty. But here's what I gained in exchange for that discomfort: I gained myself back. I stopped being the character they'd written into their story and became the author of my own narrative. And that trade? That was worth every uncomfortable conversation, every awkward silence, every relationship that had to be rebuilt on truth instead of manipulation. The thing about family control in critical moments is that it trains you to believe you're powerless, that questioning the people who raised you makes you ungrateful, that setting boundaries during a crisis makes you selfish, that wanting proof of their claims makes you disrespectful. But emotional abuse in families only survives in the dark, in the plausible deniability of you're remembering it wrong and that's not what I said and you're being too sensitive. The moment you start documenting, recording, asking them to put it in writing, requesting they repeat their manipulations in front of the person they claim to be protecting, the whole house of cards collapses. Not because you're attacking them, but because truth doesn't fear examination. So what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to keep accepting family humiliation at gatherings because that's just how they are? Are you going to continue letting controlling parents dictate your life choices because confronting them feels too hard? Or are you going to start treating emotional manipulation like what it actually is, an acceptable behavior that deserves to be questioned, documented, and ultimately rejected? You don't need a hospital crisis or a dramatic confrontation. You just need to start asking one simple question when someone tries to control you through guilt, fear, or fabricated concern: can you put that in writing? The silent power reversal that changed my life didn't happen because I was brave or special or particularly strong. It happened because I got tired of being rewritten, tired of being controlled, tired of accepting family revenge stories where I was always the villain in someone else's narrative. And in that exhaustion, I found something more powerful than anger. I found curiosity. What if I just asked them to clarify? What if I suggested involving the professionals they claimed were so concerned? What if I treated their manipulation like legitimate information that should withstand basic fact-checking? Those simple questions demolish decades of control because controlling parents can't function under scrutiny. Your family might not use hospital visits as leverage. Maybe it's holidays, weddings, financial crises, or just regular Sunday dinners where they perform your inadequacy for an audience. But the pattern is the same: create urgency, add witnesses, make accusations or demands, expect compliance, and punish any resistance with guilt or withdrawal of support. And here's what I need you to understand: you can break that pattern. Not by fighting harder, not by matching their manipulation with your own, but by simply refusing to participate in the performance. By staying calm when they expect chaos. By asking for clarity when they offer vagueness. By documenting when they rely on your faulty memory. I want you to think about what your life could look like if you stopped accepting toxic family dynamics as the price of belonging. What career would you pursue? What relationship would you embrace? What city would you move to? What dreams would you resurrect from the grave of? Be realistic and don't embarrass us, and we know what's best for you. Because here's the truth: they don't want you to discover. You don't need their permission. You don't need their approval. You don't even need them to admit they were wrong. You just need to stop believing that their comfort is more important than your freedom. The recording on my phone from that hospital waiting room is still saved in 3 different places. I haven't listened to it in months, but knowing it exists, knowing I have proof that I'm not crazy, not too sensitive, not misremembering, that's been more valuable than any apology could ever be. When my mother tried to rewrite what happened 6 months later, telling a relative that I'd caused a scene at the hospital during your father's recovery, I didn't argue. I just smiled and said, I have the whole conversation recorded if anyone wants to hear exactly what was said. She never brought it up again. That's the power of documentation in family control situations. It doesn't just protect you in the moment, it protects you from the inevitable historical revision that comes later. So here's my challenge to you, and I mean this with everything I've learned from that hospital waiting room, that groggy father who accidentally exposed the truth, that family dinner where silence became my greatest weapon. Start small. The next time someone tries to manipulate you with guilt or fear disguised as concern, don't react emotionally. Just ask one clarifying question. What exactly do you mean by that? Can you give me a specific example? Should we discuss this with the person you're claiming to protect? Watch what happens when you treat emotional manipulation at family gatherings like information that should make sense instead of attacks you need to defend against. Watch how quickly the narrative crumbles when you're not helping hold it up. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw your own family dynamics in my hospital waiting room, if you recognized the controlling parents in Robert and Linda, if you felt that familiar twist of guilt reading about how they weaponized a medical crisis, then do me a favor. Share this story. Not because I need the validation, but because somewhere out there is someone sitting in their own version of that waiting room, believing they're alone, believing they're the problem, believing that asking for accountability makes them a bad daughter or son. Let them know they're not alone. Let them know that family humiliation loses its power when you stop participating. Let them know that documentation is protection, that silence can be strategy, and that the truth doesn't fear witnesses. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about breaking free from toxic family dynamics, about finding your voice in relationships that tried to silence you, about discovering that the approval you've been desperately seeking from people who are never going to give it freely matters far less than the approval you give yourself. Hit that notification bell because I'm not done telling these stories about family control, emotional abuse, silent power reversals, and the beautiful, terrifying freedom that comes from finally choosing yourself. Your family might not change. They might never acknowledge what they did, never apologize for the years of manipulation, never admit that their concern was actually about control. But you can change. You can start documenting instead of defending. You can start asking for clarity instead of accepting confusion. You can start treating yourself with the respect they never offered. And when you Dowhen, you finally step out of the role they wrote for you and start living the story you were meant to write. You'll discover something extraordinary. You were never the problem. You were just the only one brave enough to notice that the emperor had no clothes. The hospital waiting room was just the beginning. What comes next? That's up to you.